It's 1979, and 5 weeks into launching Reggae Beat on a Los Angeles radio station, the host of the show gets a phone call from Island Records. Roger Steffens is about to be asked the question of his career. Do you want to go on tour with Bob Marley and the Wailers?
I knew I couldn't go back.
You just put it out there.
She said you've got less than a year to live.
Just dug even
Luck
deeper.
is the residue of design.
Nobody else was doing it, so why couldn't I?
That was the turning point.
Welcome to the BUCKiT podcast with Phil Keoghan. Every week I talk to mavericks, disruptors, and innovators. People who ditch the excuses, swerve off the predictable road, and epitomize what it means to tick it before you kick it.
I think he is the major musician of the 20th century. His music will last as long as we have people on this planet.
Roger Steffens is regarded as one of the top 10 most influential people in reggae music. His Reggae Archives, the largest outside of Jamaica, includes over 300,000 titles on tape, CD, and vinyl, and the world's most extensive collection of Marley reggae memorabilia, plus hundreds of thousands of other reggae and Rasta-related items spread out over 7 rooms in his Los Angeles home. His Marley collection has been called the most complete in the world by Bob Marley and the Wailers, earning Roger the nickname Ras Rojah, given to him by Marley himself. And Rolling Stone magazine said Steffens' recently published book, So Much Things to Say, is the best Marley book ever. There's no doubt this aficionado is a legend and highly respected all over the world. For the past 45 years, he's been spreading the sound and history of reggae through his radio shows, lecture series, and displays at hundreds of venues. Growing up in the Caribbean, I couldn't wait to see Roger's reggae collection at his house and hear his amazing stories of being on tour with the legend himself, Bob Marley. Ready to roll. Where exactly are we in L.A.?
Echo Park.
Echo Park. I thought the best place to start is maybe with some quotes, just to give some context to who you are in terms of your knowledge of Bob Marley, reggae music. Your story is so deep, and I think it speaks to the fact that we are sitting in your home where I have never seen so much reggae and Bob Marley memorabilia in my life. So, a couple of quotes. Roger is one of the top 10 most influential people in reggae music.
I've learned a lot. It's been a 45-year journey for me since I first read about it in Rolling Stone, and not a day goes by in my life that I don't listen to reggae, and almost every day there's a new addition to the archives. People send me stuff all the time from all over the world. The Schomburg Institute tried to buy my archive many, many years ago in Harlem. And they told me that the ephemera was of special interest to historians. So behind me are several file drawers filled with 30,000 reggae flyers from all over the world. And 100 years from now, that stuff will be priceless.
Well, I love that you have been in this world for 45 years and you still feel like you've got a lot to learn.
Oh, yeah.
But just having met you and walked around with you, that your depth of knowledge it's so deep. I wonder how it all fits in there.
My hard drive is on tilt, I think.
I mean, seriously, you must have to put more hard drive in there to just keep up with the stories and the photos and the recordings. It's endless.
It's endless. This little island, couple of hundred miles off the coast of America, and it wasn't until 1973 that people in America were even aware of the reggae world. And Bob was one of the principal reasons that knowledge began to spread with his Catch a Fire album and No Woman, No Cry, and I Shot the Sheriff, covered by Eric Clapton. That opened up new worlds.
The Catch a Fire album, was that his first album before he went and met up with Chris Blackwell?
No, Blackwell released that album. He'd had several albums in Jamaica during the ska and rocksteady periods and early reggae periods with Lee Scratch Perry. But we really think of the Catch a Fire album as Bob's first international album.
Give us some context of who Chris Blackwell was and how he helped propel Bob Marley and the Wailers.
Blackwell's an interesting character, upper-class British, related to the Cross and Blackwell family, but his mother was very wealthy in her own right. They lost their fortune when he was a kid, and he had to go to work, and he began in England distributing records out the back of his car. And he would license Jamaican records and put them on his own island record label in small center holes 45s.
Would this have been in the 60s?
Yeah, early 60s,
'Cause
the ska period.
For those people who don't know, the big Jamaican, West Indian population moved to England around the 1950s. Was a big migration, right? So there
the
was
Windrush generation was largely Jamaican people brought over to do menial jobs. Yeah, so he was catering to that audience more than anyone else. And he released Bob's first Jamaican records before Bob formed the Wailers. He had 2 records. He had a record called Judge Not and another record called One Cup of Coffee. And they're both on early island record labels in England. So he kind of lost interest in reggae in the late 60s and concentrated on his rock and roll acts, Traffic and others. But in 1972 era, he was working with Jimmy Cliff, and Jimmy Cliff had just made a movie called The Harder They Come, so he released the soundtrack of that record. And that was one of the prows on the icebreaker of reggae music, that and Catch a Fire. And the follow-ups, which included Bob Marley's version of No Woman, No Cry, and I Shot the Sheriff. And that really brought reggae to worldwide attention, and it was thanks to Chris Blackwell, in large part, that the world learned about reggae music.
How did he do it? Because how did he cut through? Because it was such a niche part of the music world.
Yeah, it was
then.
considered novelty music.
Right. But I've said this to people before, and some people have disagreed with me. I have said that having traveled to over 120, 130 countries, I've never seen one musician or a type of music cut through so many different cultures around the planet than Bob Marley. I have been, and I'm talking about more than Elvis, more than Michael Jackson, more than any popular music. You could go anywhere on this planet, and everybody knows who Bob Marley is.
Because Bob Marley's music stood for something. It meant something. It called you to a higher level of being. It made you speak and think about peace and love and rebellion. And he loved herb and was proud to smoke herb in front of anybody and say that you cannot make this illegal. How can you make one of Jah's plants illegal?
You spoke about what he stood for, what his messages were. He's always spoken for the oppressed, right? He's always spoken for those who are struggling to get their rights, to have their rights, to find freedom, as you said. And so we forget just how many people are living in developing countries that they hear this and they're inspired by it. He had this ability with his words and music to inspire in a way that I don't know if any other musician has done that.
I can't think of any. I think he is the major musician of the 20th century. There's so much about his story that is not duplicated in the lives of John Lennon or Bob Dylan or any of the major figures. His music will last as long as we have people on this planet.
And it's the demographic that he cuts through, because you will hear a Bob Marley song being played on a super yacht, and then you'll hear it being played in some poor village in Brazil. Yeah. He just seemed to cut through and speak to everybody, no matter who they were, where they were from, what their background was.
You understand, Phil.
I've seen
you get it.
I've seen it with my own eyes.
Yeah.
And when you think that he was 36 years old when he died, you wonder what would have happened if he lived as long as Paul McCartney or some other significant musicians, songwriters, or maybe he was destined to go early. I don't know.
Well, he predicted his own death at 36 when he was 24 years of age. He was living in Delaware with his mother in the summer of 1969, and he told Ibis Pitts and Dion Wilson that he was going to die at 36. That's an odd thing for a kid to be thinking about.
It is, at 24 years old.
Especially at that age.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he knew.
Roger, how did you discover Bob Marley? How did he come into your life?
There was a marvelous article in Rolling Stone magazine in June of 1973 by an Australian gonzo journalist named Michael Thomas, who said reggae music crawls into your bloodstream like some vampire amoeba from the psychic rapids of Upper Niger consciousness.
I feel like I need to be taking some kind of mind-altering drug to listen to that.
I know. And I was living in Berkeley at the time, and I put the magazine down and I ran out and went down to Shattuck Avenue to a used bookstore, and I found a $2.25 used copy of Catch a Fire, the original cover that opened like a Zippo lighter. And I took that home, and from the first notes of the first song, Concrete Jungle, I was mesmerized. And then the beat gets to you. The secret of reggae is that the beat of reggae is the beat of the healthy human heart at rest. Boom, 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 boom. That's Nyabingi music. That's Jamaican rootical music. And so you have a visceral response to it, even if you don't understand the lyrics.
Like being in the womb, maybe.
And yeah, but precisely, it's the music you hear in the beat you
With
hear
your
in
mother.
the womb.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's a key. And a lot of people around the world learned English so they could understand Bob Marley's music better. And the chosen rhythm of resistance around the world for protest singers is most often the rhythm of reggae.
Why did he feel this need to speak out to the oppressed and to encourage people to stand up for their rights? Why Bob Marley? Why was he the voice?
Bob Marley's father was a white man.
Not a lot of people know that.
He was 64 years of age when he was born to an 18-year-old black woman. His father, he was disowned by his own family. He was not a captain, and he was not from Liverpool. He was born and raised in Jamaica. He came from a very wealthy family that were constructors who built most of the infrastructure in the 1800s in Jamaica. But he was an ne'er-do-well, and he was a private in World War I, and he poured cement. But these myths go about that he was from Liverpool and he was a...
These are myths that you don't want to perpetuate, right?
No, and that's what my book puts the rest to.
I can't wait to read your book, just because I love that you have dug so far into these details and that you can give some clarity to who this person is. Not a lot of people know that he had a white father.
Yeah. And there's so many stories that go about in books and in documentaries that are just absolutely 100%
Does it drive you
false.
crazy?
It drives me nuts. And it took me 15 years to wrestle that book to the ground and 38 years of interviews. And it finally came out in the summer of 2017. And I'm really excited because we've got Dutch, French, Spanish,
Chinese, didn't
Brazilian,
you just sign
and we just sold the Chinese rights to the book. I don't know how they're going to translate fatwa into Chinese, but they're going
to have to invent some new characters.
Yeah, with dreadlock.
Yeah, maybe dreadlock characters, just to make it all work.
Yeah.
So,
but make no mistake, he was a champion of black people and black power.
Yes,
and
yet he struggled with his identity because of having a white father. You said his mother was 18 to a 64-year-old father. He got caught in between being white and black, right? And
he was rejected by everybody. He was rejected by black people because he had white blood. Even his grandmother called him the little German boy.
Is that right?
Yeah. And white people didn't want anything to do with him. But when he was living in Trenchtown as a teenager, he fell in love with a local girl, and the girl's parents came to Bob's mother and said, "You keep your kid away from our daughter. We don't want him screwing up our bloodline." Yeah. Wow. So he was a loner, and he was an abandoned child, and that's something that the Marley documentary a few years ago missed totally. The most important fact of his childhood was the fact when he was 5, his father showed up out of the blue in 9 Mile, the village up in northern Jamaica where he was born, and said to Bob's mother, give me the kid and I'll take him to Kingston and educate him, give him a shot at a better life. And instead he sent him to live with an old woman who was dying. So from the ages of 5 to 7, Bob Marley was an abandoned child in one of the worst slums in the Western Hemisphere, fending not only for himself but for this old lady. And that informed everything he did for the rest of his life. It gave him the sympathy for the down-pressed sufferers who, through no fault of their own but an accident of birth, found themselves in this hideous situation, or livity, as the Jamaicans call it.
How long did it take for him to be, I guess, he must have at some point realized that he was accepted, even though there were the struggles, but where he knew that there were people that did accept him? Because to have come through that struggle from 5 to 7 of feeling completely abandoned.
When Bob really started to make it overseas, 73 forward, then suddenly the people in Jamaica realized this wasn't just another struggler from the ghetto. This was someone that white people of means were looking toward almost as an avatar, as a savior. And so if he could make it in those places, we better pay more attention to him here in Jamaica. And it was thought by the end of his life in 1980 that if he ran for prime minister, he might win. And he eschewed politics, as all Rastafarians do. He hated politics.
Give us some context of what it means to be a Rasta and why he gravitated towards that belief.
In 1930, a somewhat obscure nobleman named Ras Rojah, who could trace his personal lineage back to King Solomon, married the empress and became Emperor Haile Selassie I, and took the title King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah. So everybody in Jamaica started saying, this is the person we've been waiting for. He fulfills all the necessities. He answers the biblical prophecy. And they began worshiping him as Christ returned to earth, not in his character as a lamb to the slaughter, but in his kingly character, which is the returned Christ. So that was the basis of the faith known as Rastafari. They are the purest ones, will live in the hills, and they are so pure they won't even eat a piece of fruit until it falls to the ground of its own volition. They don't eat meat. They try to avoid salt. They worship through the conscious use of cannabis, which to them is the herb written about in the Bible as the healing of the nation. And, as Bob said to me, this herb, like reggae music, is not for jollification, it is for headucation. And it is to bring you to a higher place. It is to bring you an elevated state. And that, when people say, didn't Bob smoke dope all the time? And I say, he smoked herb all the time, but he used it as a tool. There are all these great anthems that you hear in your travels all over the world.
Yeah.
No Woman, No Cry, Get Up, Stand Up,
Get Up
Exodus,
and Stand Up.
Three Little Birds. They're all written under the direct influence of using marijuana.
Well, I've learned so much in the last 2 minutes just listening to that whole history, because I never really understood the full context of it all. I understood aspects of it, but now I really get it.
Yeah.
And I can see why he identified with that based on where he'd come from and the message he was trying to share.
And his first record was Judge Not. The road of life is rocky and you may stumble too, but while you point the finger, someone else is judging you. And he used that chorus 17 years later in his disco song, Could You Be Loved? Only it was the I3 now singing it as a background vocal.
As soon as you say the words, you hear the song,
You
don't
hear the songs,
Yeah.
And you hear Bob's song once and you know it forever.
Yeah. You speak with such passion now, 45 years later.
Yeah.
It's like you're seeing more and more the further you go.
Every day I learn something new.
Yeah.
Since the Netflix documentary came out called Who Shot the Sheriff?
Who Shot the Sheriff on Netflix now, and you're one of the leading voices there as an authority in everything Bob Marley. Incredibly insightful. Roger, we are sitting in your home here, and a lot of people will be listening, so they can't see where we are. But if I'm not mistaken, I think there's 7 rooms in your house that are filled with more Bob Marley reggae memorabilia than I have ever seen in my life. I can't imagine that there's anywhere else on the planet that has more.
Well, the Wailers tell me there isn't, and the Wailers have been everywhere twice.
Describe to me what is around us.
There are 8 of the 13 drawers filled to the brim with Bob Marley clippings arranged chronologically, going back to the 60s. There are 1,500 T-shirts. There are 30,000 flyers. There's about 2,000 big posters. There's over 3,000 books and magazines. There's these big cabinets behind me are filled with cassettes. There's 14,000 hours of cassettes. There's 2,200 hours of broadcasts I did on the radio. I'm leaving out a whole bunch of there's art, there's
records.
Statues. Oh, the records. Yeah. There's about 10,000 records and CDs. I think 40% of all my Jamaican records are autographed, and a lot of those people are no longer with us. And buttons. There's about 4,000 buttons. To me, the buttons are the folk art of the movement. They're handmade by adherents of Rastafari, and they tell the story of the music and the faith. And every time I go to Jamaica, I come back with a couple of hundred more. And what else am I missing here? Well, paintings,
Photographs and
a 10 million diamond award given to Charlie Comer, Bob's publicist, who gave it to me when he passed away. My life's goal is to get this all to Jamaica to become a museum. I've been frustrated over the years, and many attempts have almost made it, and for one reason or another they haven't. My bottom lines are it must be kept intact forever, and it must be made available to the public while respecting all the artist rights. And I'm very, very close to achieving that right now. So
fingers crossed, because what an incredible acknowledgement of his life. And I was lucky enough to walk around with you before we started talking, and you just showed me the collection that you have. But the other thing is just your knowledge. I mean, it's very important too that all of that knowledge is connected with the pieces, that you can speak to each of these pieces here. So let's go back to when you were a younger man. You find Bob Marley. You get so excited about who Bob Marley is, and what does it inspire you to do?
Well, I've been a public speaker my whole life.
Yes.
And a broadcaster since 1961. My first interview...
You've got a great voice, by the way.
Thank you.
It's so nice to listen to your voice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My first guest in 1961 in New York was Olatunji, the Nigerian drummer, Babatunde Olatunji, Drums of Passion. My first guest. And when something excites me, I want to spread the word. So when I first heard reggae, I wanted everybody I knew to come and share this with me. Wait till you hear this record. I can't believe this record is so good.
And this is in a day when people really didn't know what reggae was.
Never heard the word. I mean, 1969 Israelites for Desmond Decker was a hit in America, but they treated it like a novelty record. Before that, in 64, My Boy Lollipop, Little Millie Small, was pure ska.
Yeah.
But nobody ever said ska.
Can you explain the difference, just while we're here, the difference between ska and reggae?
Oh, easy, yeah. Ska is, they're all based on the heartbeat, but there's different rhythms to it. So ska, 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 ska. It's a fast music. That's why teenagers love it. And we'll have ska revivals for forever. We've had 4 already, major ska revivals. Rocksteady for 2 years, 66 to 68, slowed that beat down. The myth or the legend is that the summer of 66 in Jamaica was brutally hot, so that fast dancing just wore them out too fast. So they changed it to Rocksteady. Ba-boom-pum, ba-boom-pum, ba-boom-pum. But it's still that ba-boom-pum, the heartbeat. And then chaka, 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 chaka. Reggae came in 1968 and changed the world. Wow. But it's all heartbeat.
I love that. That's so cool. So you hear this heartbeat, and you say, friends, You need to listen to this.
No kidding. And when I met Hank Holmes in 1978 in L.A. And went to his house, I was flabbergasted because he had 8,000 Jamaican records and had never left L.A. in his life. And when I first met him, he had these huge crates in his back room that he hadn't even opened yet. And I figured with his collection, and he had a great knowledge because he was reading all this Jamaican and English press. And with my radio background, we could do a great show. And we went to all the commercial stations in L.A. for a year. Nobody wanted it. And we finally went to KPFK, the Pacifica station, and they told us we couldn't do it because we were white. So we went to KCRW, a struggling little national public radio station.
I've heard of it, yeah.
That was in a converted junior high school classroom at the time, and had great plans for growth. And Tom Schnabel, the music director, brought us in, and it became instantly the most popular non-commercial show in L.A.
And what was it?
Well,
it was what you saw.
We were in the right place at the right time.
Right.
Reggae was becoming much better known. The major labels were picking up artists. Virgin and Island were king of the charts. And they had the ska revival at that point, and Madness and the Selector and the English Beat. So people were interested, and we had the best collection you could possibly have of the rarest singles, and I was getting all the new material, and between us we covered just about all the bases. And our first guest was Bob Marley.
Are you kidding?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, we were on the road. We were on the air for about 6 weeks when Island Records called us up and said, Bob's coming to town to promote the Survival album and do a bunch of shows. Would you mind going on the road with him for 2 weeks?
What?
And we did, and just had the most amazing time with him, formally and informally, and hanging out at the hotel with him. I set up 2 evenings where he saw 2 different films that were being made about him that he had never seen before. One was about the assassination attempt. A lot of that footage is in the Netflix documentary now, shot by Jeff Walker, his publicist who lived here in town. And the other was about the One Love Peace concert, when he brought Manley and Siaga together. And after we showed him that footage, where he's standing in front of these 2 men who've been responsible for the deaths of so many thousands of people, and he made him shake hands in front of 40,000 people in the National Stadium. That was a really incredible moment in the film. What a moment.
Yeah.
And we asked him afterwards what was going through his mind at that moment, standing between them. And he said, well, he says, I'm no politician, but if I'm a politician, only one thing for me to do: kill them both. Okay.
I thought he was extremely brave to be standing between them, just because both of them would have had targets on their head. And, and Marley did too.
And Manley almost didn't come out on stage.
Because he was too scared?
His wife told him if he went up there, they were liable to shoot him, so don't go up there. That's why there's such a long pause while he's waiting. He's got Siaga, whose people came to kill him 2 years earlier, and he's got Siaga at his side, and there's no Manley, and they keep looking around for Manley, and finally Manley comes up and he shake hands, you bastards, and holds their hands over his head and makes this benediction to Rastafari.
They just looked, the look in their eyes, they're looking at each other as if to say,
oh, God,
well, I guess, it's Bob Marley, he's asking us to make up here.
It's one of the most priceless musical moments of the 20th century, and his art director, Neville Garrick, compares it to Christ on the cross between the 2 thieves.
It's very, very powerful. Again, that's the documentary Who Shot the Sheriff. It's on Netflix now, and that's where we can see you, and thoroughly recommend it. I watched it. I was so tired one night, and then as soon as I started watching it, I got really invigorated watching it.
It captures you, doesn't it?
It really gets you. Yeah. I want to talk about the story of when you saved up money to go to Jamaica to buy your own reggae records for the first time, and people said, Roger, you crazy? You want to go to Kingston, Jamaica?
In the state of emergency.
When all hell was breaking loose.
It was. They had mobilized the army. They'd put tanks on the crossroads. I thought I was back in Saigon during the Tet Offensive.
Yeah, because you fought in Vietnam.
Yeah. I just want to buy records, and Kingston is deserted. The streets are empty. And everybody said, don't go to Kingston, for God's
Man,
sake.
you must
it's
have
worth
loved
your life."
reggae.
Well, it's the only place that had the records. And I had $400 US cash in my right-hand pants pocket that I'd saved up for a year to go down there. And we got dropped off. We took a minibus from Ocho Rios on the north coast to Kingston, and we got dropped off in a back alley where all the record shacks were, and the only one that was open was Bob Marley's. And the streets were really empty. Downtown Kingston, there was nobody to be seen. And the shack itself was maybe 10 feet wide, and there was a guy wearing nothing but a pair of shorts behind a board. And I said, "Let me see all your Bob Marley records." And he says, "We don't got none."
So did you end up getting what you came for? Did you get the Bob Marley records that you...
No.
Nothing?
No,
So
no.
you went home with...
He had withdrawn all his records from sale at that point because the government had banned his latest single, Rat Race, because he said, "Rasta no work for no CIA." So the government...
Well, because in the film we learned that the CIA might have been behind...
Yeah, I've wanted to prove that in 45 years of researching this.
Yes.
There's a lot of circumstantial evidence, but there is no evidence that this was a direct order from either the CIA or Edward Seaga. But I've never found proof to this day, and I would be shouting it from the rooftops if I could find irrefutable proof.
Yeah, just to give us some context for people who don't understand, Bob Marley got caught between two government regimes, I guess you could say, and they both wanted him because they realized that he was a powerful voice and could pull the people one way or the other.
Right.
Bob Marley didn't want to have anything to do with either one of them.
No.
He wasn't-
Never make a politician grant you a favor. He will only want to control you forever.
It's exactly what they wanted to do with him, right? He wanted nothing to do with it.
No.
But it got so scary for Bob Marley after the assassination attempt that he ended up having to leave the country that
He went
he
into
loved.
exile for almost 15 months.
And
Lived
what did he
mostly
do
in
during
England.
that time?
He spent most of it in England making two albums, the Exodus album, which was released in June of 77, and then the follow-up album, Kaya, which was released in the spring of 1978.
And one of the things he said was that was when he really realized how he had cut through to white people, to other people in the world, that he realized that he was loved not just in his own home country of Jamaica, but that, wow.
I think that
People
started
that-
in 75 when he played the Lyceum, which was his live album.
Yes.
And the audience was heavily white.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when he saw those crowds, he was like, oh my God, they love me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, he filled the stadium in Milan in 1980. That was his biggest show.
Can you tell me that funny story about he filled up a stadium in Milan and you were telling somebody famous that?
Well, Keith Richards came here to the Reggae Archives a few years ago to make a film for a Nyabingi album he made called Wingless Angels with Justin Hines. And I took him around to film the archive. And we came to a picture of the stadium, San Siro soccer stadium in Milan, filled to the brim. The whole field was filled. 110,000 people came to see Bob Marley, I told Keith Richards. And Keith nodded and he says, "Well, I suppose that's all well and good. In Rio, we drew 2 million. Sorry, Keith. I didn't mean to diss you, buddy.
Good sense of humor.
Yeah.
Roger, what are some things about Bob Marley that would surprise people that they wouldn't know?
He never had a home of his own. He probably bought 3 dozen homes for band members, baby mothers, relatives, his mother. He gave away almost all his money. He lived for other people. And he knew that he was living for other people. He talked about it. If I can't help other people, then my life is meaningless. And he wanted everybody to know ultimately where he had come in his own philosophy. The two great militant masterpieces of his life are his first solo album, Natty Dread, which is about confrontations with the military and sheriffs and Basically, I feel like bombing a church, he sang, now that I know the preacher is lying. Who's going to stay at home when the freedom fighters are fighting? But after he was shot, he went through a transformation. And as I said in the Netflix documentary, he comes back home and he brings the warring factions together. And that's when he went from showman to shaman. And the next militant album, maybe his greatest album of all time, was Survival in '79, with the anthem that became a beacon for the freedom fighters in Rhodesia called Zimbabwe. And he realized by that time that an eye for an eye just makes everybody blind. That if we're going to change the world, we have to change ourselves first.
You mentioned, Roger, that you got this call from Island Records in 1979.
Yeah.
They called you up and they said, we want to twist your arm, but would you come on tour?
I was jumping out of my skin with excitement. I was so starstruck at that point, you know. And I wanted to be prepared, so I did whatever research I could. And Hank and I asked a lot of very serious questions, so that basically there were about 30 people in the dressing room, and everybody was listening to Hank and me talk to Bob.
You said he was a hard worker. You said he was the first guy on the bus, the last guy to leave, dedicated. And so when you hear people say, oh, Bob Marley smoked a lot of ganja and was a slacker, kind of cruisy.
There was one thing that Bob was not in his life, and that was a slacker. Bob was working night and day. He was in constant demand by so many different elements, and he did it all with grace and with compassion and sympathy for the underdog.
He touched so many people's lives and continues to do so.
Yeah.
And you were one of the fortunate people who had a personal relationship with him. He had a nickname for you too, right?
He called me Ras Rojah.
Ras Rojah.
It wasn't Roger, it was Rojah.
Rojah.
Rojah, come here, man.
And where did that come from?
Well, everybody in reggae has a nickname.
And he just looked at you and said, well, you
Rojah.
have got kind of like a silvery afro kind of thing going on.
Well, now, but back then I had, long brownish black hair down to my shoulders, and so I was a Rasta in my heart.
Well, knowing how much you loved his music and what he stood for, it's pretty special memories. The things that you'll never forget, are there things that you often think of?
Yeah, because I was able to be with him privately, and he let me come to what proved to be his final rehearsal in California. He was playing a benefit for Sugar Ray Robinson's foundation, the boxer, at the Roxy at the end of doing shows at the Pauley Pavilion and San Diego Sports Arena. And he did a 3-hour sound check all by himself where he played all the instruments himself, because the big mockers were coming from Hollywood that night. He wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. And the first hour, he kept singing something over and over and over again I'd never heard before about redemption.
Redemption.
It was Redemption Song. And, 6-7 months before anybody ever heard the song.
What an amazing song that is.
Yeah. It just his livocation, if I had to choose one word, and if you ask this to anybody who worked with Bob, almost every one of them say the same things. Give me one word to describe Bob Marley.
Yeah.
Disciplined. Wow. Disciplined. Yeah. And if you weren't up to that standard, he didn't want you around him. I mean, the I3 tell me stories. Judy Mowat said one day he rehearsed a song for 14 hours. 14 hours singing the same song over and over until everybody got every part right. He made his band learn how to play everybody else's instruments so they knew intimately how each song fit together. If I made a tape of 10 different versions of No Woman, No Cry, they might run from 4.5 minutes to 7 minutes to sometimes 15 minutes. And on stage, a lift of an eyebrow or a flick of a finger can guide the band into a whole new place depending on what spirit had overtaken them at any given time. They were so well rehearsed they could go anywhere, and that's why we collectors prize those live tapes so very, very much.
The thing that I love...
He was like a jazz man.
Yeah, yeah. Rojah, one of the tragic things that you hear about with Bob Marley is that he gets melanoma, and perhaps had he been treated earlier, it might have extended his life. What happened? How did he find out that he had this melanoma?
After the French journalist stepped on his foot and he went to the doctor, they realized that there was something really seriously wrong with it, and they sent him to specialists, and he was told that he had melanoma and it was already third stage, and they were really anxious for him to amputate the foot, and that would almost assuredly stop the spread through his body, and he would get to live a long life. And he got a lot of bad advice from people around him. And, Rastas don't cut their hair. The idea of cutting your foot off was not what Bob would ever consider doing. And had he had the proper medical advice and had that operation, the chances are very good that he would still be among us. I think he was a fatalist. The mere fact that as a kid he told folks he was going to be dead at 36, he knew that this was what was going to kill him. And I think he wanted to stay alive, but I think he was fatalistic about it too, and knew that this is something that's very, very hard to conquer.
And when you listen to his lyrics today, Rojah, in a way it feels like they're more relevant than they were then.
I think there's a lot of prophecy in his lyrics that hasn't come true. We'll only learn that with the passage of time. Yeah, these are anthems to live by. You listen to Bob's music, you have a perfect recipe for a good life.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and sharing all those stories. I mean, intimate story. And also just letting us come into this space. And I really hope that everything that's here does find a proper home in Kingston, right? That's where you'd like it?
I think it's going to be in Montego Bay.
Or Montego Bay.
Which might be in some ways safer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's it like in Jamaica right now, out of interest? You said you were there.
Time tough, man.
Time tough.
Time tough. Yeah. But, they legalized marijuana.
What are some of the myths about marijuana that maybe people don't understand?
Well, that it makes you crazy.
Yeah.
That it's worse than alcohol.
Yeah.
I've smoked virtually every day of my life since I got to Vietnam. I needed something to cut the 24/7 tension of having a war with no front line, where they were blowing up people in sidewalk cafes in Saigon, And I didn't want to drink, because if you're drunk, you're drunk. But if you're stoned and somebody starts shooting at you, you can get straight pretty fast.
Yeah.
I mean, all of this stuff you see, the
yes.
10 books that I've written and photographed, all the liner notes I've written, all the plays I've done, all the 7 rooms floor to ceiling of stuff I've put together, I've been stoned almost all that time. So, how are you going to tell me that it makes you lazy?
Yeah, no, I can see the incredible collection. You have certainly not been idle.
No, no, I haven't.
Rojah, if there's one book that people should read about Bob Marley, is it this one?
Well, according to Rolling Stone magazine's current issue,
tell me,
Mr. Keoghan, it would be a book called So Much Things to Say, The Oral History of Bob Marley. It's written by this guy who lives in Echo Park.
I heard he was a stoner, though.
He's a big stoner, man.
I have a feeling I know part of the answer to this question. If you were going to take a road trip across America, Rojah, and you could take anybody in the car with you, You could take 3 companions from any time in history, dead or alive.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, one would be Tim Page, my old roommate, one of the greatest, most gonzo storytellers and characters in the world. I mean, how many people function on his level who have the right third of their brain blown out the back of their head and just, totally gonzo.
I'm guessing Bob would probably be on that list, wouldn't he?
Well, Bob would be there, and another man named Bob, I think, Bob Watt. He was a self-described insincere Zen master. He demanded you fall in love at least 3 times per block walked. He had a way to end the Vietnam War. He said, a 500-pound bomb costs the same as a new Cadillac. So instead of dropping bombs, we should drop new Cadillacs. And the Viet Cong would spend all their time looking for turtle wax and gas, and we'd only have to drop them once.
And what about your last day on Earth, Roger? How would you live that out?
Ooh, listening to Bob Marley, looking at beautiful photographs, watching the sunset and homing it down with my wife.
Maybe a joint?
Oh, it goes without saying. That's understood. Okay. You just take that as you're given. Phil, what a joy. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
One love.
One love every time.
Yeah. Ras Rojah.
Ras Rojah.
Ras Rojah. Yeah.
What would you be? Phil Keoghan.
I am the Filiminator.
Filiminator. That's
Rasta
good.
Filiminator.
Yes, man. That's
I'm
a great name.
Filiminating people. That's what I'm doing. That was awesome.
That was gorgeous. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. This was really a pleasure for me.
You can watch this podcast online at philkeoghan.com. And let me know what's on your bucket list. You never know. You might be my next guest. Don't forget, ticket before you kick it.